Welcome everybody to this webinar about from hoarding to deletion. My name is Atle Schekkeland. I'm the CEO of Infotection. And for those that don't know, Infotection is one of the leading experts on data security, data governance, especially using Microsoft Purview, but also our own add-on solution on top of that to embrace and expand. This webinar I'm really looking forward to, because we are going to hear then from a real case study, a leading energy company. How did they implement data governance, data lifecycle management across 80 countries and 120,000 users? So, and feel free to ask questions along the way. There's both a question and answer tab, but also have the chat that you can ask questions. So enjoy our discussion, and there's also an opportunity to schedule follow-up one-on-one calls with any of the speakers here. And the two speakers I'm joined with here are two of my favorite people. We have Susan, who's really expert in this, and also with a legal background. She has been the driving force of doing this at this large energy company that we're going to share the case study from. But last month started working for Infotection. So we're awesome and lucky, very lucky to have her here. We're also joined by Vivek Bhatt, our Chief Technology Officer. I think he knows more about Microsoft Purview than anybody else I met in the world. I think he knows more than most Microsoft people about Microsoft Purview. So really good to have him here. I could listen to him for days, but we will try to keep this webinar to maximum 1 hour in the process. And I've been just tasked to be the master of ceremony here, but also just to say a few words in the beginning and to kick and also to add questions along the way. So Vivek, if you can get to the next slide. I just want to set the scene here for why are we here. Some years ago, there was a study by CGOC that found that on average, if you look at unstructured data, 20% of business value, 5% were subject to regulatory record-keeping requirements, 2% was subject to legal hold, because there was a lot of American companies here, and the remaining 68% was rot, redundant, obsolete, and trivial, or work in progress becoming rot after a while. It means that most of the stuff we're storing is actually junk. It's root in Norwegian. But there's some gold in those nuggets, but most of it is junk. So if you're going to get rid of data and reduce that, that's the rot is perhaps the most of the starting places to go with. And what's the consequence then on hoarding? And you're going to hear a lot of these things in more detail. One, of course, is just a storage cost. You also have the compliance or privacy risk, especially due to GDPR and similar privacy regulation. If you're in a US company or places with lots of lawyers, you have the discovery cost. You have the data security risk also, because you have the more content you have, the more is your, the attack surface. And of course, you have Gen AI and Copilot that, start that rely on information, and how much personal or rot will that be if you have kept everything forever. So when I present this to customers and partners, they all said, this makes sense, this makes sense. But when you then come into the personal stuff, it's like, oh, I'm not really sure. I need to keep that information. So to set the scene here, I thought we'll start with a just small video. So if Vivek, if you do a favor and go to the next slide and start the video.
You, what's wrong with you? I don't know.
So anyway, Vivek, so I just wanted to do that because deleting information, data, it's a quite how to say tough topic for many. There's a business benefit, but also benefit for us as employees. So to learn from what have the large organization done here that actually has really moved the needle, Susan, I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. I think the funniest thing for me then was watching Vivek's face because I don't think he's seen that video. And I think he was thinking, what is Atla going to show them? But anyway, thanks. I think we all know a Stan. And we need to help Stan is the message here. So let's look at the next slide, please, Vivek. So I'm as Atlas gave me a great introduction. I'm working as the Principal Data Governance SME for Infotection. And my background is having worked for a large energy company for the last 24 years. And a large proportion of that was as their group records manager and establishing retention periods for all their valuable information, their records, and then implementing Microsoft Purview. And it's a long story and we've only got 50 minutes and I absolutely love talking about it, but I'm going to keep it high level for now. And of course, I'm more than happy to talk about it in more detail to anyone that's interested. So we worked very closely actually when we were doing this with what is now Infotection, Vivek particularly, and worked very much with Microsoft to form the functionality that we ended up rolling out. So in that sense, Atlas absolutely right. No one knows this more functionality better than Vivek. And in that sense, you know, the case study that I'm going to take you through is, as far as I'm aware, the biggest implementation of its kind. So just really high level at this slide is the picture and the journey that we went on. So first of all, we were very much wedded to the old technology. We had lots of content in LiveLink. And actually, which is not shown on here, we'd also previously implemented a record management tool called HP Trim, which was there to manage our records. However, we could see the future, and the future needed to be much more nimble for users to be able to basically put information in the right place to keep it. And then as no one, despite lots of asking, was deleting information, we knew that we had to work out a way whereby we could keep what we need and then automatically delete the rest. And as I'm a lawyer, I must say that's always, of course, subject to any preservation requirements that we had. So the journey basically starts with starting at the basics, which is what you want to keep, what you need to keep. So ensuring that we had a really clear definition of that, and that's what we call a record. And simplifying our retention schedule. So we went from a 5,000 nodule or node retention schedule, which you can imagine why that was in a huge company like this was, 80 countries, 120,000 employees, a very matrix organization, very complex organization. But however, the tooling was never going to support such a detailed retention schedule. So in 2016, we simplified our retention schedule from 5,000 to roughly 120 group retention periods, which are our main, what we call now our label policies in SharePoint, and then about 60 specific country exceptions. And at this time, Microsoft were also, as I say, working with us and other customers to basically move their technology into a place where people could keep their records and their working information, their collaboration information in one place. And that was basically SharePoint, and which became SharePoint Online. And then in 2018, we got our first view of what that functionality was in the sense of retention labels, being able to apply retention labels to valuable information, our records. And two things about that. One, users could do that and apply those manually. But equally, there was a functionality that enabled us to get people to just do it as simply as possible, which was the default labeling functionality that now exists in libraries or folders for people to simply put their information in the right place, and it gets a record label. So that in one sentence was rolled out. Of course, in one sentence makes it sound very easily, but that was implementing that functionality across the SharePoint landscape. And at that point, and this is kind of one of our big learnings, you have to, for us anyway, we had to make sure that we give people the ability to keep what they need. A bit like Stan, really. Stan in the video needs to keep his mouldy sandwich. It's not the best thing to keep, but absolutely he needs to keep what he needs to keep if he thinks it's valuable for the business. And then making sure that everybody could do that. And we gave people time to do that. In fact, we gave people a year to look at their information in SharePoint and label it as records as need be, using, as I said, the simplified retention schedule that we'd implemented in there. And then once we'd done that, that was then what we needed to be able to then implement a non-record deletion policy. So everything that isn't a record is a non-record. And around the 2018, those of you who know anything about data privacy will know that that was about the time that the GDPR was on the horizon. And we were all very concerned about our personal data and how that might impact on our compliance for the GDPR. So having implemented record labeling, that's when we implemented a non-record deletion policy of 3 years. So basically anything that isn't labeled as a record or actually modified, i.e. is being worked on and being modified, will get deleted after 3 years. And so essentially that was enabling people to keep what they need, giving them time and space to do that, and training them, of course, and there's a lot in those. I could give a whole hour on just that topic. And then it was a question of implementing those deletion policies to be able to sweep away all that rot, all those mouldy sandwiches with maggots in, and all that personal data that no longer needs to be kept, in fact, shouldn't be kept. So essentially, that is kind of that model was then we worked around all the M365 environment. Next came, as you can see, is and probably one of the most tricky was the personal spaces, as Atla alluded to. People like Stan don't like to delete their information. They like to think that they've got lots of information that's valuable to company, and they absolutely probably have. But all the while it's in their personal spaces like their OneDrive and their email exchange, it's not there for the company to use. It's not accessible. We all know that we can't readily go in there as a company and look at people's email boxes. And when they leave the company, what happens to all that valuable information? So actually, that was the next challenge, was really explaining and understanding to people like Stan that they need to put their information that they need to keep for the company in a shared space, a space that is accessible, potentially accessible. It doesn't have to have lots of wide access, but is essentially a shared space where it can be used by other people in the company. And then once we'd given people time to do that, we implemented the deletion policy of non-records, again, 3-year policy. So anything that's in someone's OneDrive that isn't, anything and isn't modified for 3 years will be deleted. And then, of course, the big challenge was doing that for email. Same principles, making sure people had time, people knew what they needed to keep, giving them a space to put it, and then implementing the policy. Easily said, of course, lots and lots of other things that I could talk about in that space, but that's essentially the principles that we adopted. And then Teams chat, and working through, and the principle of the rest of that, working through 2023 to 2022 to 23, is really about, if you're going to do this comprehensively, you actually have to lock down every little rabbit hole that people can potentially squirrel away information. Because working for companies like we all do, we've got very intelligent people, very clever people who will find ways to keep their information if you let them. And whilst you can't overnight going to solve this, as you can see on this journey, it took a long time for us to do this in this particular case study. And some of the key achievements on the left, on the right, sorry, non-records, about 3 billion deleted. That's just a snapshot. I'm sure there's many more now. And similarly with emails, 3 billion emails deleted, and lots and lots of records, useful, valuable information that the company needs, labeled and tagged and available for use for the company, and available for use for all those sexy AI tools that are coming on stream as well for the company. So I just want to, I hope that's helped and taking you through the case study. It was a long time for this particular one. And you know, what would I do differently this time? It would be different. It would be much quicker, because now we have lots of tools that we can help with which are things like content analytics, to be able to help identify those records, and to be able to move people through this journey much more quickly. But for us, for this particular company, it was a long journey, as I say. Maybe turn to the next slide, Vivek. So one of the things that we did along the way was really looking at what were our information governance principles for this journey. And I've just listed a couple of examples here. There were a few more, but with all good principles, and not to create lots that you can't enforce or aren't really understandable. But it clearly, one is for us was it makes sure every bit of information that you need, this is valuable, is in a space that can be accessed by people and used by the company. So no records in personal spaces, no records in email mailboxes, no records in OneDrive. And record labels only in shared collections. So that valuable information is in a shared collection. And again, quality information, that's valuable information that can be used for your AI tools. A default retention period has to be applied across everything eventually. Now that is a bit of a journey, obviously, but the one thing I would say is every step is progress. It's not perfection. But every time you make a tiny bit of progress in terms of an area or even one SharePoint site with the default retention deletion policy applied, that's better than you were before, and that's good. And then, of course, because I'm a lawyer and I have to mention this, we use the e-discovery functionality in Microsoft Purview to make sure that there's no spoliation claims, i.e. everything that needs to be held for a regulatory investigation can be applied. I think there's one more slide, Vivek, for me. So just it has to be simple, has to be practical, and it's progress, not perfection. This is an example of one of the things that we found particularly useful for people to keep it simple. 3 golden rules for your information. Store information in the right place. That goes back to records in shared spaces, not personal spaces. Label information correctly. Now, this includes both sensitivity labeling, which is for making sure your information is protected, and obviously a retention label. And share links, not attachment. That helps prevent the proliferation of data. It means that you're not sharing and creating a new document every time you send an email and put an attachment. And that is kind of helping stem the tide of all that information that needs to be deleted. These were 3 practical rules that we basically asked everybody, if you do nothing else with your information from a compliance perspective, comply with these 3 rules. And we found that very helpful, actually. So I could go on, Vivek, but I better give you some space to talk.
But so before handing over to Vivek,
questions.
I would like to just ask some questions,
Yeah.
and in the audience, feel free to use the chat or Q&A to ask also questions, and Susan can also try to answer that while Vivek is talking next session. But yeah. Susan, Stan, the video in the beginning. Yes. I think that I also sometimes meet Stans amongst top-level executives. Yeah. So what was the driving force here to actually ensure that we keep what we need and delete the rest? What was the benefits that the company was looking to achieve by implementing this?
Well, I mean, obviously from a legal perspective, me coming from a compliance background, for us, a real driver was compliance around making sure that we delete personal information. And basically people don't delete. I think I'm safe in saying that. There are some good people that do that religiously, but they're very few and far between. And the data privacy risk is enormous when it comes to emails and things in personal spaces. However, and that was the driver for this particular case study. However, now the driver is much more around valuable information, being able to talk to executives in the boardroom. They all want to implement AI. They all want to use Microsoft Copilot. They all want, and they want it to work for them. They want valuable data, valuable outputs, not rubbish. And if it's crawling through all that rot, all those maggot sandwiches with maggots in, then those maggots, for want of an analogy, are going to come out in Copilot. So that's where the value is.
Yeah, there's also a question. I just did you lock down personal spaces or trust people not to use them? And I think you touch upon that, because I think it was more that any space where people can store information, it needs to have then a retention scheduled.
That's right. No, we didn't look in personal spaces. There's lots of data privacy. I'm sure there's lots of people on the call who would be able to answer that better than me. But no, we encouraged people and educated people about what they needed to keep and where to put it. And then we switched on the non-record deletion policy so that nothing stays in those spaces for more than 3 years unless it's being worked on actively.
And do you have any examples of, or perhaps feel free to also chime in, examples of non-records? How do you educate people about what's the record versus non-record?
Yeah, well, it's a spectrum, isn't it? I mean, you were very clear what records are, like contracts and investment proposals and all those good things. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are clearly non-records, such as, I don't know, meeting invitations to the staff Christmas party, or maybe a regular team meeting when there's no decisions made and it's just regular updates. Those don't need to be kept long term and can be deleted relatively quickly. But there is a middle ground where it's really up to the individual how valuable they think that information is for the company. So it's a question that we basically said to people, do you think you'll need this information for the company in 3 years' time? If so, then keep it. And maybe there was a bit of overkeeping. But actually, again, what I said is progress, not perfection. Better to do that and be deleting something and then refine as you go.
Yeah. And there was another question here about should email be moved to SharePoint, or what should happen with them? And I think, Vivek, you've been telling me many times, email belong best in Exchange, but ad hoc, perhaps outside Exchange. Do you want to elaborate?
Well, emails, as Microsoft call them, are first-class citizens within Exchange. And so organizations should absolutely look to provide the controls and capabilities within Exchange Online, because that's where emails are actionable. And now Microsoft Purview provides the capability to tag emails, whether it is within your inbox or in shared spaces like shared mailboxes, group mailboxes. And there are scenarios where email needs to be kept together with a document like case management and other scenarios, etc. And in those cases, there is a valid reason to move those emails within SharePoint Online. So yes, the answer is that it's a mix of both. But what we saw in this scenario, the most effective response was to keep as much, and eventually the majority volume of the email records ended up being managed within Exchange Online.
So one more question, Susan, if I may. Now and then we meet proud information hoarders, meaning stands that like, but I saved the day yesterday because I had kept not this sandwich, but this email for 10 years or this document for the 15 years I had. And that saved the day because we then had the answer to that dispute or whatever. How do you deal with those proud information hoarders? Let's save everything that will save us in the future.
Yeah, so I think there are definitely occasions when keeping, those people have kept all their emails forever, and they find that one email that is the key thing that saves the day for that piece of regulatory investigation or that litigation or whatever it is. But for every time that someone does that, there'll be lots of information that shouldn't be kept that will come to light in those people's mailboxes, which actually harm the company. And talking to a lot of my colleagues, legal colleagues who do, regulatory investigations and litigation, for every time that there's a hero that saves the day, they'll go and collect emails or documents from a custodian who's subject to a regulatory investigation, and there'll be lots of emails, maybe smoking guns, emails that perhaps should never have been sent, that actually harm the company. And as soon as a lawyer sees those emails, they know they've just got to go and offer to settle. And it's about a balance of maybe 1 to 10, one hero versus 10 damaging emails that definitely don't help the company.
And one more comment that came in there, perhaps also take that before handing over to Vivek. Did you make a distinction between valuable data versus valuable records?
No, for us, it's the content is what is key. Content is key to whether it's a record or not. And however the format, whether it's in a structured application like an SAP system or a piece of, if you want to call that data, or it's in an email, if the content relates and qualifies as a definition, then that is a record. And of course, managing those records in those structured systems is done through a different regulatory process, which again, another webinar, maybe we can talk about that, Atle.
Yeah. And just to add a personal comment on that, many years ago when I designed the AIM certificate programs, especially the records management program, we came up with a conclusion with Mark Fresco and a few others were involved in that to help people what's the record versus not record was really 4 questions. 1, does it document the decision or recommendation? Yes, then it's a record. It has value. 2, does it improve continuity or learning? Yes, let's declare it as a record. 3, is it required by law to be kept? Okay, it's a record. And my favorite category, I'm not really sure. I think this might have value in the future. Let's make it a record.
Yeah.
If it fits those categories, yes to any of those, that's a record. But again, that's a very broad definition. It will have over-classification of records, over-declaration of records, but that's a better problem than the opposite usually.
Yeah, and it's a problem that you can deal with then later down the line, perhaps with some content analytics to really refine your record collection and all of that. But it's better to, as I say, to get one step further on the journey and then refine as you go. So Atle, I think you and I are going to have to let Vivek have a word, otherwise he's not going to get a word in edgeways.
Yeah, because now people are like, no, show us and how can we do this as fast as possible, as smart as possible, as cheap as possible. Come on,
Vivek.
Well, and I talk slow and
yes.
So anyway, I mean that was really interesting. And every time I hear there are so many different lessons and experiences, and I was part of that journey since the beginning, from writing the first set of specifications. So things are a lot more easier now with technology has evolved. And I'm as Atle did, I'm just going to start with some quick facts. What we've kind of seen so far is from an industry analysis that the organizations who fall into this category, what Susan talked about, are really 15% of the organizations in the market today. What we are seeing is that with numbers of regulations, new AI acts, etc., and this desire to onboard new AI technologies within an organization, our view is that by 2026, that number will increase to 40% of organizations. Still not a big coverage, but by 2026, we will see that number increasing significantly, that organizations will consider lifecycle management, data governance as a core competency within their organization, not just as a project to implement, but as a core competency which must exist within an organization in order to be able to not only implement some of these controls and be compliant and demonstrate compliance, etc., but also be able to operate these controls effectively. So some of the key scenarios InfoTection covers, and the solution which I'm about to talk about, which Microsoft Purview is an integral part of that solution, covers many scenarios, but 4 of those top scenarios, which we hear again and again from organizations, are tell me where are the data privacy risks exist within my organization, and the discussion is no longer just about M365. The discussion is about other data sources, especially around the connectedness of different data sources, different systems, different applications, etc. Work is not just happening in that one Microsoft 365 platform. Increasingly so, it's happening there, but there are other areas as well. Organizations not just want to look at data as a single monolithic blob. People want to look at in context of their business. What's the risk, what's the value related to data and information within my part of the business, instead or in addition to having an organizational view. And data access is becoming a huge topic. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but you may have been to several of those co-pilot webinars, some of in protection webinars as well. There's a lot being said about oversharing, who has access to data. And that was always a challenge, but then comes an even bigger challenge now, that with the adoption of Copilot and generative AI controls, etc. And then the last two are related to very core to what Susan talked about. Identify information of value that we can keep for long term to meet our legal, regulatory, and business value, but also at the same time help us reduce the rest of the information which is not information of value, is duplicate of the rest of the information, and a lot of it is redundant, obsolete information which had value at some point in time, but because historically organizations have not implemented a retention lifecycle management process as such, that information still sits in the system and perhaps even creates more risks. So we look at it from a risk and value perspective, so not just as a risk driver. There are significant risk drivers such as legal and regulatory. There are, the consequences of, even look at breaching data protection laws and regulations can be, staggering. There's about 4% of gross annual turnover, and we have in penalty, and we've seen several European agencies who have taken tough actions by imposing financial penalties. And if you look at just in the section of the Article 5 of GDPR, there is something to be said about the legal and regulatory risk, which is quite significant. But related to that is an important consequence for every organization, for every business, is the loss of trust in the company and impact, and especially for companies who have a brand value and have a share price driving, the risks associated with that can, far significantly outweigh the impacts of, the financial fines and penalties. Atle talked about, the risk related to cyber attack. The cyber attack surface is a driving factor, and we have seen with the cloud digital transformation has been a much bigger topic than just Copilot adoption. And I just wanted to use an example of in 2019, it was reported that there was a US financial services company which had credit card applications and data breach, and majority of the data which was breached, and this is publicly reported, belonged to the applications which were declined as part of the credit card application. Now, under the Federal Fair Credit Act, the retention period is 25 months. So those declined applications could have been very easily tagged as such with a 25-month retention period and could have been disposed either automatically or after a review if there was a retention management process in place. So we are seeing examples of such specific scenarios which are appearing in the public domain where something could have been done in hindsight in order to avoid such situations, and the solutions which are available are not that complex to implement, especially in case of these. But the topic kind of goes back to know your information. How do you identify information As such, the case study which Susan shared was very much dependent on location-based containerization and putting that in context of an organization where people have to just file or use the right place for the work that they need to do, and the information will be tagged automatically. From a value perspective, we are seeing a lot of value being created in terms of the defensible destruction of data, physical and digital records. And we have seen organizations demonstrating a value factor towards sustainability, towards carbon footprint. And we are also seeing that there is a significant value in operational cost saving. So if the colleagues who are on the call are from an IT organization, we've done an analysis that an average organization is likely already spending or going to spend about £80,000 to £100,000 per year in purchasing additional storage cost in the cloud, because you have already reached the limit of your storage costs, your storage quota, which is available to you because of your licenses, etc. within N365. So, there are some real dollar or pound or euro value associated with demonstrating the active lifecycle management, deletion of information, and being able to keep the information that you really need to keep for long term. And that has shown organizations saving significant amounts of IT storage, IT operations cost in terms of buying more storage. And then the final is what we always strive for, is the business operations efficiency. Most of you are not records management companies, you're not data management companies, your business is something else, but a lot of that business relies on being able to access the right information at the right time. And we've been saying this for decades now, the concepts of knowledge management, etc. And what we're realizing is that with automated labeling, such as the case study Susan mentioned, the new controls which are available with Microsoft ecosystem, not just in Microsoft 365, but the overall data governance platform from Microsoft Purview, does start to provide the capabilities where the burden is no longer on people. 10, 15 years ago, we were still asking people to populate the metadata and prompting them, and they wouldn't be able to check in the file if they wouldn't provide the metadata. We don't have to do that anymore, because we have the capability and controls in the background. And many organizations, whether you are an E3 or an E5 or other tier of license, have some level of that capability available. But what we're finding is that it's just not used and not implemented so far. So how do we do it from an protection perspective? We look at the data governance as a full solution, not just a Microsoft 365 solution. And none of our customers are 100% Microsoft 365, and all of our customers are in multiple places, using third-party applications, using data storages on file shares, cloud file shares, AWS, Microsoft 365, OneDrive, Teams, etc. So we don't just want to offer a solution which just works for Microsoft 365 and doesn't work for other solutions. So overall approach from a solution perspective is InfoTection has a solution called iArm, which is built on top of Microsoft Purview, which is the core foundation, the Microsoft Purview data governance, which provides the technology component and the technology engine to be able to establish a discovery and inventory of data sources. And then iArm works in integration with Microsoft Purview to be able to pull in the global regulations based on that, enable organizations to not just implement your data classification scheme as a one-off, but as the regulations change, then how do you update those data classification schemes? How does that impact the existing labeled information, the information which is not labeled, the net new information, etc.? We have an orchestration and reporting platform as part of the solution, which provides a full syncing capability, a capability to be able to leverage your data index, to be able to discover, classify, and also perform policy enforcement. And the policy enforcement could be in the context of just apply a label, and it could be a sensitivity label or a retention label to the information, but also that this information is in a Microsoft 365 expensive storage, and this information has now expired, but we are not ready to delete it, archive that information into a cheaper tier storage. And that could be if you are a Microsoft 365 archive user, and you're using Microsoft's new archiving capability in M365, or if you are using the more traditional methods of archiving into cloud archival platforms, third-party cloud archival platforms. One such we integrate with is from a long-term digital preservation perspective is Preservica, and also into an Azure blob storage where a tiered storage can be provided to keep information which needs to be archived but doesn't need to stay in a long-term storage. And supporting that is what we call as a user interface for your business, for managing the information, reviewing the information, getting the insights about the data in context of their organization, not just what's going on across the organization, but specifically also in context of a particular department, a business, a unit, and a team. So the data classification definitions and rules are leveraged using Microsoft Purview, which is the technical platform for building a single index. It's also the engine for enforcing controls and outcomes, such as applying encryption, managing access controls, managing retention, and also applying controls such as immutability when information is identified as a record. Microsoft Purview also provides all the centralized auditing capabilities. So from an IT security and IT operations perspective, all the activities related to the data, information, records within Microsoft 365, outside of Microsoft 365 is all audited into one single place. And that then can be integrated with your other cybersecurity solutions, information security solutions, etc. Then comes IARM, which is what we call as a rules orchestration and enforcement layer. And as I said, it's the user interface for data owners, provides rich user interface, reports, analytics, and also the ability for authorized users, data owners, information owners, business analysts, etc., to be able to perform remediation or correction or bulk changes, etc. And that provides integration with all of your data, including Microsoft 365, if you have data in file shares, Azure file shares, AWS, and we also have integration with other third-party applications, such as a good example would be ServiceNow, where knowledge articles are stored in ServiceNow. Some of those knowledge articles are information of value, they need to be managed as such, etc. And they may contain sensitive information, so they may need to be labeled as such and applied some security controls in order to make sure that not just the documents which are sitting in Microsoft 365 as sensitivity labels, but the documents and data outside of Microsoft 365 can also benefit from the enrichments and the controls which are being applied into M365. Finally, just coming to an end, I just have this final slide. From a value proposition perspective, our goal, InfoTection's goal, together with Microsoft, is to provide a single control framework, a single solution where you can define your classification schemes, your rules, automation controls, and then leveraging Microsoft Purview as the core platform for indexing, mapping, and discovering information. IARM is able to federate those policies into different data sources, including Microsoft 365, and of course then bring that back as a unified value proposition collectively of insights and reports across all of your data. One of the case studies we did with our customer, we were able to identify 60% of the data was in the category of redundant, obsolete, trivial. And the majority of that 60% was actually duplicate content, which is all the information sitting within your ecosystem, but you don't have the tools to actually even do a simple analysis like where is the duplicate information, the file sitting in file share and the file sitting in SharePoint, is that an exact duplicate or not a duplicate? Using these tools and using this unification, you have the ability to get that information through a single platform and a single user interface, which is provided by IR. So on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Atla and see if there are any questions.
There's a bunch of questions, but thank you, Vivek. But since I am the MC, that means I can then perhaps prioritize and one question first for me, and then have the others just to kick this off. So many companies, yes, we have Microsoft 365. During COVID, we got Teams explosion everywhere. We have SharePoint sites everywhere, but we're still stuck with a lot of dark data on shared drives, even though some of us have started moving file server shared drives over to Azure files. So Vivek, just some what we talked about here, the framework, isn't shared drives and file share in Azure another place we really need to also start paying attention?
Yes, exactly. And we kind of have, Susan and I have used this analogy for a long time is, stop the river, then clean the lake, etc. So you've got to stop the river first, which means that the net new information, how do you ensure that the net new information, that every single new document which is created has got the right classification? And the moment we start doing that, then it gives us a clear scope for the existing information, which then needs to be cleaned up. Doesn't have that significant urgency, but you allow yourself the time to be able to look at that, because that's going to be, for every organization, in context of the organizational scale, is going to be a significant amount of data.
And also one more thing I think that you alluded to and touched upon, I just want to also emphasize and perhaps get your comment on it again, and that is that the business knows best their business data. And we on corporate sit centrally. We have an understanding of what people do and stuff, but we're not really an expert on what's the business and the business data. And Purview has these central capabilities with a lot of role-based access, but it's central tenant-wide access. And isn't success then, I think you alluded to it, isn't success really also then empowering the business there to actually also make decisions about their data?
Yeah, I mean, IT can build all the rules, all the controls you like, but the evaluation of that is in the hands of the business. And so many organizations make significant investments in reporting capabilities to be able to pull that data out of Microsoft Purview and give that into the hands of the users. And that's exactly what IR is doing. As I keep saying, is that is the user interface for business. Microsoft Purview is really the user interface for IT administrators, compliance officers, etc. But when we say business, they need to see the data in context of their business. Even though every organization works in the spirit of a single organization, but when it comes to the business units, departments, etc., they really need to look the information in that context. And that's one big problem that we are actually addressing as a product value proposition. So organizations, Purview is exactly the same for every single organization. The information that is collected in Purview is exactly the same for every single organization. And what we are delivering is a simple product which collects that information and puts that information and insight into the hands of the users.
So a couple of questions and comments from the audience here. There was a comment here, the only way to get record labels applied correctly is via auto-apply. Comments on that, Susan? Because the journey you shared there from the case study, it sounds like that was manual in the beginning and then a little bit automatic. But I know you, Vivek, have worked a lot on how do you automate records declaration and classification.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go first. It's controversial, I think, that statement. I mean, I think from the journey that I explained, we didn't have that ability to start with. We only had the manual functionality, so it wasn't available. Now, would we do it and use it if we did it now? Yes, absolutely, because it's there and it can be used. But is it essential? Because I think, at the end of the day, you need to have people in the business understanding their information, and auto reply sort of takes that away, that accountability away. And you do want to make it as easy as possible for people, but you don't want to make it so people aren't really understanding what their information is, because you need them to be able to use their information and get the value out of it. So I think personally there's a place for both. There are clear cases where auto labeling, you can identify records very easily because they're clear, like we said, the spectrum. But there'll be a lot of nuances around whether it's a record or not. And you alluded it to, do you need to keep it? Those sort of questions, I personally think it's very difficult to auto label those and get it any level of real accuracy and not really over retain lots. So I think actually there's a place for both, but if you're going to start and you need to, as I say, progress but not perfection, then start with some auto labeling and refine. I don't know, Vivek, if you agree with that or not.
Yes, I do agree. As we always say that, people, the control, the accountability needs to be with the business. They need to have controls to be able to see and review if the outcome of an auto labeling is correct, or does
Yeah.
that need a review or a revision. And that's why those insights are really important. And just one more thing to kind of add, that auto classification or AI or auto application is not just using AI. Setting a default to a library where you know that information that you're going to upload is of going to be a certain type. And we've seen several scenarios, for example, finance operations, where they have a certain structure to follow. In context of HR, there is a certain structure to follow. Where there is a certain structure to follow and information is organized and structures are organized, we should count that in as well into the category of auto application.
Yeah. And that's why I really liked what Susan shared of what the requirement for people. It's, what was it? Store information in the right location. So if it has value, that's a shared space, SharePoint or shared mailbox. What was it? Ensure it's labeled correctly. It might be automatic based on storage location, but you have a responsibility to ensure it's labeled correctly.
Yeah.
And 3, share links as much as possible in attachment instead of, or sorry, links in email instead of attachment. I think were those 3 rules they worked on. So
Yes.
we have, sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think this there's lots of chat from Bruce, I think, in the chat about auto labeling and not being able to rely on users. You're absolutely right. I mean, humans are have a degree of they need to be motivated. They need to do it. They need to be trained. There's all of that. But actually, auto labeling helps with that immensely. However, I just don't think we can just rely on it completely. I think there's a place for both, but you have to just find your way, whatever your use cases are and whatever your priorities are, to get going on that, I think.
Yeah. So I know there might be more questions we might have not covered here, but I'm happy to, I think we're all happy to have a follow-up conversation. Susan and Vivek, any guidance or advice for the future? What should people do next? You want to go first, Susan?
Well, obviously, if they want more information and to talk to me, that's what they should do. Get in touch with me. I've got my details, and I'm very happy to talk more. I think someone's already asked on the chat if I'll be able to talk this through more. Absolutely. And the other thing is, I think for me, the lasting thing was, this can be overwhelming. Deleting a whole bunch of data and not knowing where to start is overwhelming. I absolutely get that. But the thing is to start. Don't worry about it, where you're going to end up, how long you're going to get there. But getting going and starting is key, and start very simply.
Thank you. Vivek?
I would say there's a heavy focus right now on security, and retention records management may not necessarily be the first area of investment these days, but it plays a really important role in improving the security posture as well. And we've seen that a number of times, that if you have an effective way of managing life cycle of information, then you have a better control and you have better accuracy on what you are actually protecting and what you're actually securing. And the second point I would say is that the business participation is very important in this, especially if you're looking to auto apply. It's it's where you can actually drive accountability from the business as well in participating in the definition of those auto application rules or auto classification rules, etc., where business can be a real input and real accountable party in actually building, and it should not just be done by IT in isolation, which can then lead to false positives, misclassifications, etc. So I think those would be the two things I would say. Thank you.
So thank you to all attendees. Thank you to Oda and Gardi for organizing this event. Thank you to Susan and Vivek for sharing the insights. And I would perhaps also just reinforce what was said earlier on. If you want to carry on this discussion one-on-one, also with NDAs, contact Susan and see if you can learn from the past to improve the future. And if you want a technical demo, ping me, ping Vivek, and to see, okay, how do I do this? How do I empower the business to basically manage their own data? So thank you all for your being here, and look forward to follow-up conversations and to move things forward here. Have a lovely day, lovely evening, wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.